Xylo of the Glypton geode felt the ambient political tension as a low, discordant hum against its crystalline facets. As a junior attaché, its role was to observe, record, and refract. Its own form, a bipedal structure of interlocking amethyst and quartz, was currently angled to catch the light from the lumina moderators, allowing it to process their energy-based communications directly. The formal proceedings were still an hour away, but the informal posturing had already begun. At the center of that posturing, as always, were the Cathar. Vorlag, the Unbroken, ambassador of the Cathar Dominion, stood on his delegation's obsidian platform, a mountain of black and red chitin. He was a creature built for conquest. 4 primary limbs, thick as ancient tree trunks, ended in razor-sharp claws that scraped idly against the platform's surface. 2 smaller, more dexterous limbs were crossed over his broad thorax, and his head, a terrifying fusion of reptilian and insectoid features, swiveled slowly, multifaceted eyes taking in the entire chamber. His mandibles, capable of shearing through starship plating, clicked a steady, intimidating rhythm. The Cathar were the galaxy's undisputed apex predators. Their biology, their society, their technology, all were extensions of a singular, driving imperative: dominate, consume, expand. They were currently cornering the Cygnian delegation. The Cygnians, a graceful avian species with plumage that shimmered like captured starlight, looked fragile and small before Vorlag. Their delicate, hollow bones were practically an invitation to violence in Cathar culture. The subject of the dispute was the Veil of Alcyone, a resource-rich nebula technically within Cygnian territory. The Cathar wanted it. They did not ask, they declared. "Your historical claim is as flimsy as your wings, little bird," Vorlag's translated voice boomed, a bass rumble that vibrated through the floor and into Xylo's own crystalline structure. "The nebula was born of a supernova. It belongs to no one and therefore to the strong. It belongs to the Cathar." The Cygnian ambassador, Lyrael, fluffed her ruff in a gesture of defiance, but her voice trembled. "The treaties ratified at the first confluence are clear. The veil is within our sovereign space. We are prepared to offer mining licenses, generous ones." "Licenses?" Vorlag let out a chittering laugh that scraped at the nerves of every species present. "Prey does not offer licenses to the predator. It offers its throat." Xylo meticulously recorded the exchange, its internal light patterns shifting to denote the threat level. This was standard Cathar diplomacy, a show of overwhelming force, followed by a reluctant concession from their opponent, and then the inevitable annexation. The other great powers, the silicon-based glyptons, the psionic cephalopods floating in their nutrient tanks, the ancient lumina, would offer token protests but would not risk war over a nebula. It was the predictable, dismal calculus of galactic power. It was then that Xylo's attention was drawn to a delegation it had, until now, largely dismissed. They were newcomers, having only achieved interstellar travel a mere 2 centuries ago. They called themselves humans. Their platform was modest, unadorned, and drifted near the periphery. There were 12 of them, an unusually large number for a diplomatic team. They were so soft. No chitin, no scales, no energy fields. Just thin, pliable skin over a calcium-based endoskeleton. They were distressingly symmetrical, bipedal, and possessed a startling lack of natural weaponry. They were, by every conceivable galactic metric, prey. Their ambassador, a female named Evelyn Reed, was watching the confrontation with a placid expression. Her face was a canvas of soft tissues, difficult for Xylo to read, but the dominant impression was one of calm. It was an inappropriate response. She should have been displaying signs of anxiety, like the Cygnians, or haughty indifference, like the cephalopods. Instead, she looked like she was observing a mildly interesting meteorological phenomenon. One of her companions, a powerfully built male designated as General Thomas Sterling, whispered something to her. Reed gave a minuscule nod, her eyes never leaving Vorlag. Xylo focused its optical sensors, trying to understand their bizarre tranquility. They were chattering quietly amongst themselves, their communication a cascade of low-frequency vibrations Xylo's translator struggled to parse for emotional content. The words were diplomatic platitudes, but the tone beneath them was something else entirely. It was loose, relaxed. They were not afraid. Xylo found this fascinatingly illogical. Fear was a rational response to the Cathar. Fear was a survival mechanism. The humans' lack of it was a sign of either profound ignorance or a fundamental disconnect from reality. Based on their unimpressive biology, Xylo leaned toward the former. They simply did not understand the danger. The formal session was called to order by the lumina, their forms brightening into a cohesive wave of pure white light. The floating platforms drifted into a circular arrangement in the center of the nexus. Vorlag's platform was directly opposite the Cygnians, a deliberate act of intimidation. The humans' platform was, by chance or design, situated adjacent to the Cathar. The debate began, and it was as brutal as Xylo had anticipated. Vorlag dispensed with all pretense of diplomacy. He laid out the Cathar's claim not as a proposal, but as a declaration of intent. He used phrases like manifest destiny, biological imperative, and the cleansing fire of a superior people. He projected holographic images of Cathar battle fleets, their jagged, weapon-studded hulls designed to evoke primal terror. Lyrael of the Cygnians responded with appeals to law, to history, to shared decency. Her voice was eloquent and impassioned, but it was the song of a bird arguing with a tidal wave. The rest of the confluence remained silent. Xylo watched the other delegations. The cephalopods swirled their bioluminescent chromatophores in complex patterns of disapproval, but offered no official support. The Glypton High Elder, Xylo's superior, remained as still as a mountain, its official stance one of non-intervention. To interfere was to invite the Cathar's attention, and no one wanted that. The debate wore on for 3 hours. The air grew thick with unspoken threats. Vorlag grew more and more agitated, his movements becoming sharper, his voice louder. He was enjoying the spectacle, feeding on the fear he was generating. He was a predator toying with its meal, and the entire galaxy was his audience. "These laws you speak of were written by the weak to constrain the strong," Vorlag roared, slamming a clawed fist onto his console. A crack spiderwebbed across its surface, and a tremor ran through the platform. "They are cobwebs, and we are the storm that will tear them down." He then turned his massive head, his gaze sweeping past the cowering Cygnians, and settled on the silent human delegation. "And you," he spat, the translator barely keeping up with the venom in his tone. "The new ones, the soft ones. Let this be your first lesson in how the galaxy truly works. There are no laws, there is only power. There is only the predator and the prey." He was trying to use the humans as an object lesson, to further humiliate the Cygnians by association. It was a common Cathar tactic. Xylo prepared to document the humans' inevitable flinch, their panicked retreat. But they did not flinch. They did not retreat. Ambassador Evelyn Reed's calm expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. A subtle shift. The placid observation sharpened into something keen, something focused. She gave another one of those infinitesimal nods, so small that Xylo's enhanced sensors barely registered it. And then it happened. It started with General Sterling. He had been standing with his arms clasped behind his back in a formal military posture. In one smooth, silent motion, he unclasped them, letting them fall to his sides. His shoulders, which had been set and square, seemed to loosen, to settle. He shifted his weight slightly, from flat-footed to the balls of his feet. It was a subtle change, almost unnoticeable, but it transformed his posture from one of parade ground rest to one of imminent, explosive readiness. Simultaneously, the xenobiologist, a man named Aris Thorne, who had been leaning against a railing studying a data slate, straightened up. He set the slate down without a sound. He flexed his fingers once, then let his hands hang loose. His gaze, previously academic and distant, was now fixed on Vorlag. The cultural attaché, Lena Petrova, the linguist, the chief of staff, all 12 humans moved as one. There was no signal, no sound, no spoken command. It was a coordinated, synchronous rising, as if they were all connected by some invisible network, all responding to the same silent stimulus. They rose from their chairs or straightened from their leaning positions, not abruptly, not aggressively. They moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with their blocky, graceless biology. Their collective posture was a paradox. They looked relaxed, almost languid. Their shoulders were down, their arms hung loosely at their sides, their fingers slightly curled. Yet every line of their bodies screamed potential energy. They were like coiled springs, like the moment of utter stillness in a great cat before it leaps. The tension in the room, which had been a loud, roaring fire stoked by Vorlag, was suddenly replaced by a different kind of energy, a cold, silent, and infinitely more terrifying pressure. But the most chilling part was their eyes. All 12 pairs of them, 24 eyes in total, were fixed on Vorlag. They were not wide with fear or narrowed in anger. They were simply locked. It was a gaze devoid of emotion, a gaze of pure predatory assessment. It was the look of a creature that has identified a threat, evaluated it, and is now, in the silent spaces between heartbeats, deciding how to dismantle it. It was the look of a creature that hunts not for hunger, but for dominance. It was the gaze of an apex predator looking at a loud, posturing rival and finding it wanting. The entire Grand Nexus, all 200 delegations, fell silent. The hum of 1,000 different life support systems seemed to fade away. The only sound was the faint clicking of Vorlag's mandibles, but even that began to slow. Vorlag had been in the middle of a triumphant roar, but the sound died in his throat. He had felt the shift in the room, the sudden drop in temperature, the focusing of every being's attention. He turned his head fully toward the humans, his multiple eyes trying to process the impossible sight before him. He saw 12 soft, fragile creatures standing in perfect, unnerving synchronicity. He saw their relaxed postures, their ready balance, and he saw their eyes. For the first time in his long, blood-soaked life, Vorlag the Unbroken felt an instinct he had only ever inspired in others. It was a cold spike of primal dread that bypassed his logical mind and spoke directly to the ancient parts of his brain. It was the instinct of a hunter that has stumbled into the territory of something older, something quieter, something far, far more dangerous. His brain, conditioned by a lifetime of dominance, told him this was impossible. These were prey, small, weak, soft-fleshed prey. They had no natural weapons, no chitinous armor. They were nothing. But his instincts, honed over millions of years of Cathar evolution to identify the deadliest thing in any environment, screamed a single, frantic, undeniable word: danger. The clicking of his mandibles stopped. The aggressive posture, with his thorax puffed out and claws extended, began to subtly deflate. He saw the human general, Sterling, whose eyes were tracking the joint at the base of Vorlag's primary side limb, a known weak point in Cathar anatomy. He saw the xenobiologist, Thorn, whose gaze was fixed on the spiracles along Vorlag's side. The entry points to his respiratory system. They were not just looking at him, they were mapping him. They were dissecting him with their eyes, identifying vulnerabilities with an efficiency that bespoke a terrifying familiarity with violence. A low growl rumbled in Vorlag's chest, but it was not a sound of aggression. It was a sound of uncertainty, of confusion. It was the sound a wolf makes when it comes across the tracks of a grizzly bear. He took a half-step back, an involuntary, instinctual retreat. The scrape of his claw on the obsidian platform was deafening in the profound silence. The power dynamic of the entire Grand Confluence, a structure that had been stable for 1,000 years, had not just shifted, it had shattered. And it had been broken not by a fleet of warships or a thunderous declaration, but by 12 soft-skinned creatures standing in perfect, coordinated, and utterly terrifying silence. The prey had looked back at the predator, and the predator had been the first to blink. The silence stretched, thick and heavy as neutronium. Every being in the Nexus was frozen, a captive audience to a drama they could not comprehend. Xylo's crystalline mind raced, trying to reconcile the data. Fragile biology, primitive technology, lack of natural weapons, and yet this silent, unified projection of absolute menace. It was a contradiction of all known xenological principles. Power was expressed through mass, energy output, physical prowess. The humans were expressing it through stillness. It was wrong. It was impossible. Into that impossible silence, Ambassador Evelyn Reed's voice fell, calm and clear, without a trace of the tension that held every other being in its grip. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Ambassador Vorlag," she said, her tone level, almost conversational. "You speak of power. Let me offer a different perspective. True power is not the ability to crush the weak. It is the ability to choose not to. Her words were simple, the kind of platitude often heard in these halls, but coming now from her in this moment they were imbued with a terrifying weight. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a warning. She was not asking him to be merciful. She was informing him that they were choosing to be. She gestured lightly with one hand toward the holographic display showing the veil of Alcyone. The nebula is rich in the heavy elements we both require. A joint mining and scientific venture, overseen by a neutral third party like the Lumina, would benefit the Cathar, the Signians, and the galactic community as a whole. It would foster cooperation and generate far more long-term wealth than conquest. She was restating her earlier proposal, the one Vorlag had laughed at, but it was not a proposal anymore. The context had changed. The silence of her delegation was the punctuation at the end of her sentence. It was an offer, yes, but it was an offer one does not refuse. Vorlag stood motionless, his massive form a statue of conflicted instincts. His pride, the core of his Cathar identity, demanded he strike these insolent creatures down, tear them apart for their defiance. But his survival instinct, the one that had kept his ancestors alive for eons, was screaming at him to back away, to de-escalate, to remove himself from the presence of this incomprehensible threat. He looked at Reed, her face placid, and then at General Sterling, whose gaze had not wavered from his limb joint. The general's eyes held a chillingly professional curiosity, the look of a butcher contemplating a new cut of meat. The Cathar were predators, yes. They were strong, fast, and armored. They hunted down large, dangerous prey on their homeworld. But their method was overwhelming force, a swift, brutal charge. They were ambush predators, shock predators. The humans, they were something else. Their stillness spoke of a different kind of hunt. It spoke of patience. It spoke of endurance. It was the stillness of the hunter that does not need to ambush its prey because it knows, with absolute certainty, that it can simply run it to the ground, no matter how far it flees, no matter how long it takes. It was the confidence of a persistence hunter. Xylo, with its vast database of galactic species, suddenly accessed a new, horrifying context: persistence hunting, an almost unheard-of evolutionary strategy. Most predators burned energy in short, violent bursts. Their prey only had to escape that initial burst. A persistence hunter simply kept coming. Over hours, over days, it didn't need to be faster or stronger. It just needed to be more relentless. It was a strategy that required not just physical endurance, but a terrifying degree of mental fortitude, a near-psychopathic focus and will to succeed. What kind of world, Xylo wondered with a shudder that vibrated its entire frame, would produce such a creature? A world where the only way to eat was to become more stubborn than death itself. Vorlag finally broke the standoff. He let out a grating hiss, a sound of frustration and forced submission. "Your proposal is unorthodox," he rasped, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The Cathar Dominion will consider it. We must consult the High Command." It was the thinnest of diplomatic excuses, and everyone knew it. He was retreating. The unbroken had been broken. He gestured sharply to his delegation, and with a series of loud, clattering steps, they turned their backs on the humans. Their obsidian platform disengaged from the central forum and began to drift back toward the Cathar embassy alcove. Vorlag did not look back. The moment the Cathar platform was clear, a collective exhalation seemed to sweep through the nexus. The pressure vanished. The human delegation relaxed, the eerie tension draining away as quickly as it had appeared. General Sterling clasped his hands behind his back once more. Dr. Thorne picked up his data slate. They were once again a collection of unassuming, soft-skinned diplomats. The transformation was so complete, so instantaneous, that if Xylo had not recorded it with every sensor it possessed, it might have doubted its own perception. The Lumina moderators pulsed with a soft, relieved blue light. "Ambassador Reed's proposal seems most logical," their collective thought voice echoed through the hall. "We will place it on the formal agenda for ratification." The Signian ambassador, Lyrael, stared at the humans, her beak slightly agape. The shimmer of her feathers was one of pure, unadulterated shock. She drifted her platform toward the humans, bowing her long, graceful neck. "Ambassador Reed, on behalf of the Signian people, we are in your debt." Evelyn Reed offered a small, disarming expression that Xylo's databanks identified as a smile. It involved baring the teeth, a universal threat display in 90% of known species. On her, however, it seemed benign, another paradox. Alliances are the foundation of a stable galactic community, Ambassador, Reed said smoothly. We were happy to lend our support. The rest of the session was a blur. The main point of contention had evaporated. Delegates from dozens of species began subtly maneuvering their platforms closer to the humans, sending feelers, opening low-level diplomatic channels. The humans, who had been galactic pariahs an hour before, were now the center of a new, rapidly forming political gravity. They were no longer the newcomers. They were something else entirely. A new piece had been placed on the board, and it had upended the entire game. When the session finally adjourned, Xylo knew it could not simply file its standard report. It had to understand. Overcoming the Glypton instinct for detached observation, it maneuvered its platform through the throng, its crystalline legs clicking softly on the polished floor, until it reached the human delegation. The humans were packing their data slates, their movements efficient and calm. Xylo stopped before the xenobiologist, Dr. Aris Thorne. He was the one whose gaze had been the most analytical, the most chillingly academic, as he had assessed Vorlag's vulnerabilities. Dr. Thorne, Xylo began, its synthesized voice a series of melodic chimes. May I ask a question of xenological import? Thorne turned, his soft human face crinkling around the eyes in that smile gesture. Of course, attaché Xylo. I've been reading the Glypton papers on silicon-based metabolisms. Fascinating work. Xylo paused, momentarily thrown by the casual compliment. Thank you. My query pertains to the demonstration earlier. My understanding of human biology suggests a classification as a Class 4 omnivore, mid-range predator-prey status. Your species lacks significant natural defenses or offensive capabilities. Yet the response of your delegation to the Cathar threat was incongruous with this data. Thorne's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes still held a flicker of the cold assessment from before. Ah, you mean the fact that we didn't panic and flee. I mean the coordinated, silent, and frankly terrifying display of predatory intent that caused a fully mature Cathar battlelord to involuntarily retreat, Xylo stated, its internal translator adding the appropriate emphasis. Thorne chuckled, a soft, breathy sound. He looked around, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You see, attaché, your classification is both correct and completely, fundamentally wrong. You're looking at us as we are now in an age of technology and comfort. You're not looking at what we are, what we were forged to be. He held up one of his hands. It was soft, with 5 slender digits and no claws. You see this. It looks weak, but it can grip a rock or a spear for hours, for days. It can nap flint into a razor's edge. It can tie a knot. It's the most adaptable, manipulative appendage in the known galaxy. He then tapped his temple. And this is the real weapon. Not what's inside, not just the intelligence to build starships, but the software it runs, the millions of years of evolutionary programming. Xylo remained still, its facets angled to capture every nuance of Thorne's expression. Please elaborate. Our homeworld, Earth, Thorne began, his voice taking on a professorial tone, was not a paradise. It was a competitive slaughterhouse. For most of our history, we were not the strongest or the fastest. We couldn't outrun the great cats. We couldn't outfight the cave bears. We were soft, slow, and delicious. By all rights, we should have been a footnote in the fossil record. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. So we adapted. We couldn't win in a sprint, so we learned to win in a marathon. We became persistence hunters. That lion that could kill us in 3 seconds. It could only run for 2 minutes before overheating. A human could run for 8 hours in the noonday sun. We would just follow it, jogging, trotting, for hours, until the lion, a creature of terrifying power, collapsed from heat exhaustion. And then we would walk up with our sharpened sticks and kill it. A cold, sharp vibration ran through Xylo's body, a creature that could run a lion to death. The concept was obscene. We hunted in packs, Thorne continued, his eyes distant, as if seeing a primeval savanna instead of the glittering nexus. And that's the key to what you saw tonight. Our greatest weapon has always been coordinated action. We learned to communicate silently, with a glance, a shift in posture. When a threat appears, every human in the pack knows their role without a word being spoken. The leader assesses, the strongest prepare for combat, the strategists identify weaknesses. What you saw wasn't a trained military drill. It was instinct. It was the ancient, hardwired response of a pack of apes confronted by a snarling saber-tooth. "You are saying," Xylo clarified, its vocalizer struggling to remain level, "that your diplomatic delegation is, on a biological level, a hunting party." "Precisely," Thorne confirmed with a grim satisfaction. The general wasn't just posturing, he was unconsciously preparing to lunge and hamstring. I was identifying the quickest way to induce systemic respiratory failure. Lena, our linguist, was watching Vorlag's mandibles, ready to predict his next vocalization or strike based on the muscle twitches. We were all doing it. We couldn't have stopped ourselves if we wanted to. He gestured back toward Ambassador Reed, who was now in a deep, smiling conversation with the cephalopod ambassador. And Evelyn, she's the pack leader. She was the one who decided in that split second whether the threat needed to be eliminated or managed. She chose to manage it, for now. The chilling implication of those last two words settled into Xylo's consciousness. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a revelation of a fundamental truth. The humans were not prey who had learned to act like predators. They were predators who had, for a brief time, learned to act civilized. The Cathar call themselves apex predators, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And they are, on their world, in their evolutionary niche. They are lions, they are sharks, they are terrifying. But on Earth we had things like that, and we drove them to extinction. We did it with stones and pointed sticks. We are the things that hunt the monsters. Xylo was silent for a long moment, processing. The galaxy had always operated on a simple hierarchy. At the top were the Cathar and a few other similarly aggressive species. In the middle were the great intellectual powers like the glyptons and cephalopods. At the bottom were the myriad smaller, weaker species like the Cygnians and presumably the humans. That hierarchy was now a lie. There was a new variable, one that didn't fit the existing scale. The humans were not strong in the way the Cathar were strong, or intelligent in the way the glyptons were intelligent. They were something else. They were relentless. And in the long run of galactic history, perhaps relentless was the most dangerous trait of all. "Your species, you hide this," Xylo stated. It was not a question. "Hide it?" Thorne gave a dry laugh. "No, not at all. We celebrate it. Our most popular stories are about it. Our greatest heroes are defined by it. We just don't tend to lead with it in diplomatic introductions. It's generally considered impolite to inform a new acquaintance that your ancestors survived by being the most patient, cooperative, and viciously intelligent killing machines on their planet. But if they insist," he added, his gaze flicking toward the distant, sullen Cathar delegation, "we are more than happy to provide a practical demonstration." Xylo finally understood. The human's soft skin wasn't a weakness. It was camouflage. Their placid expressions were a mask, hiding a mind forged in a crucible of unimaginable, protracted violence. They had not just survived their death world, they had conquered it. They had mastered it so completely that they had been forced to turn their predatory instincts on themselves, in millennia of brutal warfare, honing their skills of pack tactics and strategic murder to a level no other species could possibly comprehend. And now they had brought those skills to the galactic stage. Its duty was clear. Xylo bowed its crystalline head slightly. "Thank you for the clarification, Doctor. It has been illuminating." As Xylo turned to leave, its mind was already composing the priority one report to the Glypton geode. The old equations of galactic power were obsolete. The Cathar were yesterday's threat, a loud, roaring beast that could be understood, predicted, and it now seemed cowed. The humans were a quiet, creeping tide. They would not conquer with fleets, at least not at first. They would use cooperation, logic, and alliances. They would present themselves as reasonable, helpful partners, but beneath it all the instinct would remain. The patient, relentless, terrifying instinct of the persistence hunter. And the galaxy, Xylo realized with a final, profound shudder, was a very, very large savanna. And it was full of prey that had no idea it was being hunted.